All right, back with lesson 112, and today the lesson is probability. Probability. All right, so probability is almost always going to have questions that deal with game spinners or dice, or one of my favorites, the bag that you put your hand in that has blue, red, and green marbles in it. All right, so those are the three types of problems that you're going to get. The probability, unless you're going into mathematics or statistics, you're not going to deal with it a ton, but it's still really good to be familiar with it and to understand how these people, those brainiac mathematicians, how they calculate these kinds of things. Of course, it gets a lot more complex as you go along in your education, and you can take whole long classes on statistics and semesters and years worth of classes on statistics, but for right now, we're just going to deal with game spinners, dice, and blue, red, and green marbles in a bag. So first, let's talk about the game spinner, okay? So think back to your days when you played Chutes and Ladders with your parents or Candyland, and you would spin and you would get a number and then you move your little guy. So to find probability, the probability of outcomes is the number of outcomes, number of possible outcomes over, the number of outcomes over the number of possible outcomes. For example, what is the probability that we're going to spin a 1 on this game spinner? It is 1 out of 4, right? So a quarter. What is the probability that we will get an even number? Well, even numbers on the board are 2 and 4, so it's 2 out of 4 or 1/2. Okay, so on and so forth. It's divided into 4 parts. So your denominator for this is always going to be 4, okay? Because that's your total or your number of possible outcomes. Now, if we're dealing with the dice, or the die, or the dice, whatever, how many sides does a die have? It has 6 sides. So your denominator is always going to be what? 6, okay? So because that's the number of possible outcomes. Well, what's the chance that you're going to roll a 3? It's going to be 1 out of 6 times. What's the probability that you're going to roll an even number? Well, let's see. Dice go from 1 to 6, so 2, 4, and 6. So 3 out of 6 or 1/2. What's the probability that you would roll a number greater than 4? Okay, what numbers are greater than 4 on a dice? Only 5 and 6. So we have 2 out of 6 or 1/3. So obviously we're going to be dealing with a lot of fractions for probability, and then you just have to do a little bit of critical thinking. So let's look at the first example. It says a deck of cards, oh, I'm sorry, I left out the cards. A deck of cards has 52 cards. 13 are spades, 13 are hearts, 13 are clubs, and 13 are diamonds. Jimmy tears up the ace of spades. That's not very nice, Jimmy. Then he shuffles the remainder of the deck and draws 1 card. What is the probability that the card will be a spade? So normally, how many cards are in a deck? 52. But Terry, we should call him Terry because he teared up the card. What's his name though? Jimmy. Jimmy tears up the ace of spades. So how many cards are left in the deck? 51. So our denominator is going to be 51 now instead of 52 because of Jerky Jimmy. What is the probability that the card will be a spade? Well, he tore up that 1 spade card, right? Normally there are 13 spades in a deck, so instead of it being 13, it's going to be 12. So 12 out of 51, which would be your final answer, except these both have a factor of 3. So we can reduce this to 4/17. So again, 52 cards in a deck. Jimmy tears up a spade. Now there's 51 cards in the deck, but only 12 spades instead of 13. 12 out of 51 reduces to 4/17. Let's look at the next example. All right, it says one of the die is red and the other die is green. Both are rolled. What is the probability of getting a sum of 7 and a sum of 6? Okay, so you can see in your book, there's a little chart. All right, and so that can help you calculate the probability with some of these problems. It says we make a table that shows every possible outcome. The integer values represent the total number of dots displayed on the top face for both die for each possible combinations. So the probability of us rolling a sum of 7. So you can see on the diagonal here that they show you that you can roll a, where'd the 7s go? Oh, it's going this way now. Okay, a 6 and a 1 would give you a 7. A 5 and a 2 would give you a 7. A 4 and a 3, a 2 and a 5, and a 6 and a 1 again. So the probability of you rolling a 7 would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out of 36. So 6 times out of the 36 possible outcomes. Well, where am I getting that number 36? I'm getting that 36 because I have 2 dice and 2 die, and each die has 6 sides. So we have to multiply that. 6 times 6 gives us 36 possible outcomes. And that's what you're seeing in that chart, is that it's 6 long and 6 wide, and so there's 36 possible outcomes. So so the 7 has 6 opportunities out of 36, which reduces to 1/6. So your probability of getting a 7 is 1/6 of the time. Now they also ask you for a sum of 4. So we look back at our chart again, and we look for where there are 4s. And it's just right here because there's not as many numbers that can add to give us a value of 4. Are there? So we can have a 1 and a 3, and we can have a 2 and a 2, and we can have a 3 and a 1. So there's only 3 combinations on our 2 die that can give us a sum of 4. So we get 3 out of 36 because, again, remember there's 6 sides on each dice. 6 times 6 is 36. So that's our whole, or our denominator, our possible number of outcomes. 3 out of 36 reduces to 1 out of 12. Share a factor of 3. So this was part 1 of probability, which means that we'll be getting another lesson on probability before the end of the year. Lesson 114, so next week. Let me know if you need help with this. Probability is something that you've probably been doing since about 5th or 6th grade in different variations, so you should be pretty familiar with it, but just remember that your denominator is always the possible number of outcomes, and then your numerator is the number of times that thing could happen, okay? And it's always going to vary based on the scenario that they give you.